So with that, we're going to show you a product demo. And we're going to start with a block out of the factory, out of a box, and we're going to show you how quickly it is to deploy a workload on that. So with that, we're going to bring up Steve Poitras here, who's our technical marketing engineer, and he's going to run you through that. Here, I'll do that later.
Hey guys, so Steve Poitras here. We'll just connect my laptop so we can present. And we'll go ahead and get started. Cool, so I wanted to stay away from the word demo because really what we're doing today is what we would do if we're deploying this for an end user. So this is actually what we do on the field doing these deployments. So here's kind of our mission for what we're going to run through today. We're really going to build a software-defined data center in 15 minutes. So a lot of people would say, you might be crazy trying to do this in 15 minutes, but it really shows the ease of deployment for the product. So just to set a little bit of background here, I'm going to be playing the role of an IT admin operating a mixed workload environment on Nutanix. In my role, some of my goals are the maintenance of SLAs and SLTs. I want to ensure good end-user experience. I need to maintain multiple workloads, as well as maintain capacity for scale and growth. The hardware that we're going to be working with today is 2 Nutanix complete clusters, Arista 7124 switch, and then an APC 2200 UPS. And this is actually all local with us today in that ruggedized case. Okay, so what we'll be doing, basically as mentioned earlier, we're actually going to be deploying a brand new from the factory Nutanix cluster, configuring its storage, and then exposing that to vSphere. Really the main things to highlight there is the speed of delivery and the time to value. We can actually do this in probably around 5 minutes. So after 5 minutes, you can actually start provisioning virtual machines and utilizing the system. We're then going to kick off a VDI boot storm using VMware View, and then scale out our cluster from 1 to 2 blocks. So mentioned previously with Infinity is our ability to dynamically scale out our cluster, which we'll be showing that here today. Cool, so let's go ahead and get started here. So what I'm showing here is basically our 2 Nutanix blocks via the VI client. I have one that I previously configured earlier this morning with all our infrastructure components, vCenter, Active Directory, SQL Server, etc. And then I have one non-configured cluster. The main thing that I want to point out here is in this second cluster here, I only have local storage. So what we'll do is we'll actually configure the Nutanix environment and then expose storage to these hosts. So what I'm going to do now is go over. As mentioned, we use Bonjour for some of our cluster initialization. So we'll actually use this to do the initial config for this Nutanix cluster. So here I can see here all the devices that have been discovered using Bonjour.
So is the cluster chassis aware? I have 4 nodes in a chassis. When you do data distribution, is the cluster chassis aware so that my data is
blockware? We call it blockware.
Okay.
The answer is today partially, very soon totally. So today, so every cluster has data and metadata. The data is blockware, so we place one copy on one block and another on a different block if 2 blocks are available.
Okay.
But metadata today is not, which we are fixing soon. It's coming up.
Cool. So here we can see that my laptop has discovered our Nutanix controllers. We can see the type here, which is the Nutanix TCP. What I'm going to do here is actually open up this host. So I'll just select that, open up a new window. Now what this page is loading, this is what we call our cluster init screen. So basically this is what's going to allow me to configure my IP addresses for both my EXSi hosts, my Nutanix controllers, and my IPMI. So here we'll just name this TFD demo, and we'll select the controllers that we want to configure. So we're just doing a single block here. This is not limited to a single block, so if I had 4 blocks or a 16-node cluster, I could configure that all through this interface as well. And I've selected the nodes. I'll go ahead and click Configure. See here, it's configuring the IP addresses, some of our metadata, and then we can see that the cluster has been successfully initialized. So Now what I'll do is I'll actually go over to our controller VM, one of the ones that we just configured. Bring this up over here. Cool. So here we're logged into our controller VM. Just going to run a cluster status, which will give us the current state of the cluster. So here we can see that our cluster has been configured. The current state is down, so what we're going to do is go ahead and start this. So what it's doing now is it's actually bringing up the Nutanix distributed file system, all the metadata on all the Nutanix components. While this is starting up, has anyone done a vBlock, FlexPod deployment, or any converged infrastructure deployment?
Those guys know better than to let me see one of those things.
So guys, by the way, this cluster start does exactly what I talked about. Post on a central bulletin board. The cluster needs to be started. Everyone else kind of acts independently, and it is just waiting for everyone to kind of act and finish.
So was this operation to grow the cluster or to initialize the cluster for the first time?
So this is actually a base from the factory cluster install deployment.
So he added a cluster, and then he added a block, and then.
And the thing to really note here, so previously I came from a large SI, and we did a lot of FlexPod and vBlock deployments. So one of the biggest things is, number one, we'd never try to deploy a vBlock in 15 minutes. Normally it would take us days or weeks to actually do this deployment. And then number two, we'd never actually show this live because there's a lot of issues that we would always run into in the past. So what we're doing here is all live. It's actually running here locally. And that really demonstrates the confidence in the product here. We're confident, and it's quick and efficient. So we can see here, all the services are starting up. Okay, here we can see our cluster status. Our cluster has come up successfully. We can see all the services are all up. So now we'll actually go to our Nutanix UI. Okay. So now we're loading our Nutanix user interface. Go ahead and log in. Okay. So here we can see our Nutanix block that we just configured. We can see all of our EXSi nodes with the IP addresses that we had set for them. We can see our various disk tiers, etc. This is basically a newly fresh configured Nutanix block. So what we'll do is we'll actually configure our storage. First, we're going to configure a storage pool, which is basically a group of all our physical disks. I'll select our disk tiers that we'll be adding to this pool. Okay, we can now see our storage pools being created. Now we'll go ahead and create a container. Let's just do TFD demo.
So storage pools are ways to physically abstract out physical hardware resources?
Storage pools is a way to group disks. Containers are a way to group VMs. So very simple.
Yep. So now we created our container here. We get a prompt asking if we want to actually create this data store on our EXSi host. So we'll actually go do that. We'll select our EXSi host that we've set the IP addresses on. Then we see here that the data store has been created. Now what I'm going to do is actually hop back to our vSphere UI that we were previously on. Now if I look at my hosts, I now not only see the local data store, but also the data store on the Nutanix cluster that I just created. So really what we're showing here is, number one, from point of inception after we rack stack cable a brand new Nutanix block, all the way to exposing storage to EXSi and being able to provision virtual machines. I didn't actually keep track of time, but I would assume it's right around 7 minutes. Okay, 7 minutes with talking. With any other legacy infrastructure or traditional infrastructure, that would be something that would be unheard of. So here we can actually start using and delivering value to the business. So now what I'm going to do is here, remove this. And then what I'm going to do is actually destroy this cluster so we can actually go through and merge these two clusters with the one that we have currently running. So going back to our, what was that?
No, never mind, just being smart.
You?
Shocking, isn't it?
So yes, what we have here is basically a block that we previously configured this morning with all our infrastructure components. We'll actually just bring up a monitoring UI. So here I can see my vCenter Operations UI with the View plugin. What we're going to do is we're actually going to kick off and grow our View pool. So we're going to provision a 400 desktop boot storm on the platform. The other thing that I want to note too is we actually have Hadoop running on this system. So here I'm going to go back to our View pool. And then right now there's just two desktops. So provision one desktop because this is using View Storage Accelerator or CBRC. So just to save on the digest computation time, provision one desktop to make sure that was already there. Okay, so let's go ahead and edit this pool. And let's set this to 400. And then, you know, we might as well just power all of them. Okay. So as we're modifying the pool here, this will actually kick off the provisioning process, bootstorm process, the customization process on these desktops. The one thing to note here is this is just right now on a single block. When we start talking about density, 400 desktops in a 2U footprint, that's normally something that would be unheard of, but given the architecture, it's something that is actually possible. So here we'll actually go back to vCenter. We can see that it's actually kicked off the provisioning process. The other thing to note here is we're VI enabled, so these were actually using VCAI or View Composer for array integration to actually do these cloning ops. So this is array side based link clones using View Composer. So I'll actually let it go through the provisioning process and config. Now what we're going to do is, you know, there were questions that came up earlier around scaling of clusters or adding or scaling compute with storage as a whole. So what we'll do is we'll actually scale our infrastructure out. What we'll see in our vCenter Operations UI is the load on these hosts will actually, they'll start to become constrained. So in order to facilitate that, we'll actually want to scale out our cluster. So what I'm going to do here is actually connect to another cluster, or the one that we have currently running. Let's log in as the Nutanix role. Okay. And now I'm going to actually discover the nodes or the cluster that we previously destroyed. So this is the additional block. Okay, so here, using the Bonjour protocol, as previously mentioned, we can actually see the 4 nodes that we had previously destroyed. So we can actually add these to our currently running cluster. We'll do here. Take my commands, and I'll actually go through the add node process. So this is actually going to create scale from a 4-node Nutanix cluster up to an 8-node Nutanix cluster. Okay, here we actually get the output. So this is saying that the node has been added successfully. You know, when we start talking about scaling traditional storage arrays, adding nodes is something that normally is not something that occurs. If we have like a NetApp FAS or something like that, we have our dual controllers, but we really don't scale those controllers unless we scale the array as a whole. That's really one of the nice things about this platform is because it is an end controller model, as we scale up, we actually eliminate those bottlenecks that the controllers would normally provide. So now we'll actually go through to our...
I just realized that we added 4 nodes to an existing cluster in less than a minute.
Yeah. Okay. I'm actually going to go back to our Nutanix user interface. And we're actually going, these nodes have been added to the cluster, and we're actually going to expose that storage that those nodes now have access to our vSphere hosts. Okay, so here we actually get a notification saying that the nodes have been added. We can see here that there's now 2 blocks instead of the previous 1. So basically, like mentioned, in a matter of a minute, we've actually scaled and doubled our capacity. You know, from a storage footprint, that's 20 to 40 terabytes raw capacity. From a core standpoint, we're looking 96 logical cores per 2 U block. So click OK. I can see my previous cluster, and then I can also see my newly added cluster. Now what I'm going to do is actually expose our, basically mount those containers as data stores on our ESX hosts. So I'll go here to containers. And here are the containers that we've previously created. I'm actually going to map these to our new ESX hosts. Okay, click Create. Now we see that this has actually been successful. Now I'm going to go back to my VI client. And then we'll just give it a sec. We can see that we've merged our Nutanix clusters, scaled those from 48. We've exposed that storage to our newly provisioned EXSi host, and now have access to that. So that's really, you know, scaling the compute, or scaling the storage. If we want to scale the compute, what we do is basically add these hosts to our other vSphere cluster, and really let DRS kick in and move that workload amongst those hosts. So now going back to the presentation, let's just give a quick recap of what we've actually just done in this very short period of time. We've deployed a bare metal Nutanix complete cluster. When we start talking about speed and time to value, you know, that's almost the definition of it. We've configured our storage, exposed it to ESXi hosts not only once but twice. We've provisioned a View desktop pool while running Hadoop on our cluster. As mentioned, Hadoop is sequential I/O. VDI is mainly random I/O. It really shows the expensibility from an I/O footprint for the Nutanix platform has. For this environment, we're actually using Nutanix compression for both user data, so this is our user profile and user data, as well as our Hadoop data, and then Nutanix ILM, or information lifecycle management, for our data tier optimization. After provisioning that, we've actually scaled out our cluster, scaling from 1 Nutanix block to 2 Nutanix blocks, doubling our capacity, really showing the scalability and the ability to start small and scale. When we start talking about a lot of VDI deployments, you know, no one's going to buy a V block just to run a POC on that. One of the nice things with the Nutanix product is you can just get a single block, prove out your VDI POC with 400 desktops, and then if you want to scale that infrastructure out, you don't have to reconfigure it, tear it down, buy new hardware. You can just extend what you currently have in place today. So, mission accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who perhaps got a chance to put your arms around this demo, this is something that will take you a week with an existing infrastructure to get all of this going that we've actually accomplished in 10 minutes, a little over 10 minutes. I think the whole...
Some of us are good.
Sorry? Some will disagree. You think it's going to take longer for them? But the key thing is, like, you know, time to value, speed to market.
In 6 days.
6 days.
And he would rest on the second.
The time to value, speed to market aspect of converged infrastructures is just as important, because these things would otherwise take you a week, you know, to. And the scale of time, look at the 10 minutes. We're not talking about 1 hour or 10 hours. 10 minutes. We've done. We perhaps saved tens of thousands of dollars in just OpEx itself. Any questions for Steve? I mean, he's made it look very simple. This is something that's extremely profound. Stuff he actually got done.
Can you tune down or turn off the animations?
Yeah, man, the loading
The
thing with the
bouncing.
water and the...
That I like. That I only see once a month, probably.
Yeah.
But the bounciness, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really one of the nice things is...
Wait. The guy from Disney wants less animation?
It doesn't have the right characters.
Well, that's just a licensing issue.
Yeah.
So we're working on an HTML5 version now. This was all Flex.
Okay.
And the next time you folks are here, we'll actually show you the other version as well.
Okay.
And that's going to be iPad ready and iPhone ready and all that stuff.
And Android ready?
Android ready, yeah. HTML5 works on Android as well. So
The other nice thing too is really once you do your initial configuration, I call it almost a set it and forget it. So you know, after that, you can really just start working with your VI client as compared to having to go back to the Nutanix UI. So.